My name is Ellen Marsh, and I was 40 for the year my mother died on a Tuesday morning in April, quietly, the way she had always done everything that mattered. She passed at 6:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I was the one holding her hand. I had been holding her hand, in one form or another, for 12 years. By 9:00 that same morning, my sister had changed the obituary. Welcome to her silent triumph, the channel for women who gave everything quietly and were erased loudly, and who found out that the truth, when it finally lands, doesn't need to raise its voice. If you have ever been the one who stayed while someone else took the credit, leave a comment below and hit subscribe. I read every single one. I should tell you who my mother was before I tell you what happened to her death. Margaret Marsh was 71 years old. She had white hair she wore pinned up even on bad days, a preference for pale blue, and the specific dignity of a woman who had raised 2 daughters on a schoolteacher's salary after my father left in 1987 and did not come back. She made her own bread on Sundays. She had opinions about grammar. She kept a crossword dictionary on the kitchen table and consulted it without embarrassment. She had a stroke in March of 2012. She was 59. I was 32 and living 20 minutes away in a rented house in Canfield, Ohio, working as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing firm. My sister Dana was 38, living in Scottsdale, Arizona, in a house with a pool and a husband named Patrick who had strong opinions about real estate investment. Dana called me the morning after the stroke. Her voice was efficient, the way it got when she had already decided something and was informing you of the decision. Mom is going to need a lot of help, Ellen. Obviously, you're closer. I'm going to try to fly out when I can. I want to be fair to how that sounded in 2012. It sounded reasonable. I was closer. She had a life in Arizona. I had a life in Canfield, but Canfield is a small word and Scottsdale is a large one, and somehow the distance between them always seemed to favor Dana's version of the story. I moved in with my mother that April. I told myself it would be temporary. It was not temporary. 12 years is a long time to be temporary. Here is what 12 years looked like, in the flat, specific language of someone who kept records, because she worked with numbers and numbers don't lie. I gave up my rental in Canfield in June of 2012. I moved my clothes, my desk, my one bookshelf into my childhood bedroom, the one with the window that faced the backyard where the oak tree still stood that my father had planted before he decided fatherhood was optional. I negotiated to work remotely for the manufacturing firm 3 days a week and took on freelance bookkeeping for 2 local businesses to cover the gap. I made less money than I had made before. I told myself it was temporary. I stopped telling myself that around year 3. I drove my mother to physical therapy twice a week for 14 months after the stroke. I learned to cook low sodium because her cardiologist said so. I sorted her medications into a weekly pill organizer every Sunday evening, the same day she made bread until she couldn't make bread anymore, and then I made the bread and she told me I was doing it wrong, which was how I knew she was still herself. In 2016, she was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. Not the fast kind, the slow kind. The kind that takes a decade and asks the people around it to grieve in installments. I learned what that meant in practice. It meant that some days she knew me completely, and some days she called me by her own mother's name. It meant I bought a baby monitor so I could hear her at night. It meant I found the stove on twice in 1 week in the spring of 2019, and after that, I disabled the burners and bought a single-serve kettle and a microwave and told her we were modernizing the kitchen, which she accepted with the polite suspicion she applied to everything she wasn't sure about. Dana came to visit 4 times in 12 years. I am not estimating. I counted. March 2013, Christmas 2015, a long weekend in September 2018, when she brought Patrick and the kids and stayed at a Holiday Inn 30 minutes away because Patrick found the house, and I am quoting here, claustrophobic. And then October 2023, 6 months before my mother died, when Dana came alone and stayed for 4 days and organized my mother's closet and took photographs of the furniture and told me I was doing an incredible job and that she didn't know how I managed and that Mom was lucky to have me. I should have heard what was underneath those words. I was too tired to listen for it. My mother and I talked about the house in the last good year. This was 2022, when she still had her clear days, the ones that came in the mornings before the fog settled in. We would sit at the kitchen table with tea, and she would do her crosswords slowly, with a pencil now, because I had convinced her that pencils were simply more practical, which was a lie, but a kind one. The house was a 3-bedroom colonial on Millbrook Drive that she had owned outright since 2004, when she paid off the last of the mortgage on a schoolteacher's salary and celebrated by buying herself a new kitchen faucet. She had mentioned it in her will. She had a will. I knew she had a will because I had driven her to the attorney's office in 2018 to update it. Sat in the waiting room while she went in alone because she was still the kind of woman who handled her own affairs, and driven her home afterward. She told me once, on a clear Tuesday morning with the crossword open and her tea going cold, that she wanted the house sold and the proceeds split equally between Dana and me. Equal, she said, because you're both my daughters. She said it firmly, the way she said things she had already decided were not up for discussion. I said that was fair. I meant it. I had not moved into her house to inherit it. I had moved into her house because she needed someone to move into her house, and Dana was in Scottsdale, and my mother had made bread on Sundays and had opinions about grammar and had raised 2 daughters alone, and she deserved to have someone hold her hand. Equal was fair. What Dana had planned was not equal. My mother died on a Tuesday in April at 6:14 a.m. She had been on hospice for 3 weeks. The hospice nurse, a woman named Rosalie who had the calm of someone who had done this many times and had not let it harden her, arrived at 6:45. She was kind. She made tea. She sat with me in the kitchen for 40 minutes while we waited for the funeral home. I called Dana at 7:00. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was thick with sleep. Scottsdale is 2 hours behind. Mom is gone, I said. A silence, then oh God, then I'll book a flight. She arrived Thursday afternoon. I picked her up from the airport. She hugged me in the arrivals terminal and she cried. Real tears, and I held her because she was my sister and our mother was dead, and whatever else was true, that was also true. The problems began that evening. Dana had brought a laptop. She set it up at the kitchen table, my mother's kitchen table, the one my mother had bought at an estate sale in 1994 and refinished herself one summer with the windows open and Al Green on the radio. Dana opened it with the brisk efficiency I remembered from childhood, when she used to reorganize my room while I was at school and call it helping. I've been thinking about the obituary, Dana said. I thought I could draft it tonight and we could submit it to the Canfield paper tomorrow. That was reasonable. I was exhausted. I said yes. I should have asked to read it before she submitted it. I found out about the obituary the way I found out about most things that were done to me quietly, from someone else. My mother's friend Vivienne, who had lived 2 streets over and had known my mother since their children were young, called me Friday morning. She had a careful voice, the kind people use when they are about to tell you something and are not sure how you will receive it. Ellen, she said, I read the obituary in the paper. I just wanted to say it's lovely. And then, after a pause that carried more weight than the words that had come before it, it mentioned Dana so much. I wasn't sure why your name was so small. I thanked Vivienne. I hung up. I found the obituary on the newspaper's website. It was beautifully written. Dana had always been a good writer. It described my mother accurately with love, with specific detail. It mentioned her teaching career. It mentioned her bread. It mentioned her crossword puzzles. It mentioned that Margaret Marsh was survived by her beloved daughter Dana Marsh Kowalski of Scottsdale, Arizona, and her daughter Ellen. That was it, her daughter Ellen. No location, no descriptor, no context. Dana had named herself completely. I was a subordinate clause. More than that, the obituary listed Dana as the primary contact for memorial arrangements. It listed Dana's cell phone number. It described Dana as having been by her mother's side through her illness. By her mother's side. I stood in my mother's kitchen, where I had lived for 12 years, and I read the phrase by her mother's side, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very cold. I did not call Dana immediately. This is important. When something hits you that hard, the first instinct is to react, and reaction is exactly what people who do things like this are counting on. They want you loud and emotional and easy to dismiss. I went to my mother's desk instead. She had kept a small desk in the corner of the living room, a roll top that had belonged to her own mother, and inside it she kept files organized with the meticulous care of a woman who had managed a classroom for 31 years. Bills paid, bills pending, insurance documents, the deed to the house, her will in a sealed envelope labeled Margaret A. Marsh, last will and testament with the attorney's name and phone number paperclipped to the front. I had not opened that desk in months. There had always been something more urgent. I opened it now. The will was where it had always been. The attorney's name was Gerald Foss and Cantor, estate planning, on Federal Plaza in Youngstown. I had driven my mother there 6 years ago. I found the envelope and I held it and I did not open it because it was not mine to open unilaterally. But I memorized Gerald Foss's phone number and I put it in my phone. Then I sat down and made a list, not out of anger, out of habit. I had been a bookkeeper for 22 years. When something doesn't balance, you don't shout at the ledger. You find the discrepancy. 12 years in residence. Dates I could document. Employer records showing my address as Millbrook Drive since 2012. The lease I had given up. The W-2s filed from this address, year after year. The utilities, which had been in both my mother's name and mine since 2014 when she asked me to be added because she kept forgetting to pay them. The medical appointments, which I had recorded in a spiral notebook I kept on my bedside table. A habit I had started because the doctors always asked how often things had happened, and I could never remember. The notebook had 4 volumes. I had filled them and bought new ones. 4 notebooks, 12 years of Tuesday mornings and cardiology appointments, and the slow, careful record of a woman's life being tended. These were not weapons. I want to be clear about that. They were just the paperwork of what had actually happened, the ledger of 12 years. I called Gerald Foss on Friday afternoon. Gerald Foss was a measured man in his early 60s who spoke the way estate attorneys speak when they have seen families dissolve over smaller things than this. He confirmed that he remembered my mother. He confirmed that the will had been updated in his office in 2018. He could not tell me the contents over the phone, he said, but he could tell me that as a named party in the estate, I was entitled to be present when the will was read, and that he strongly recommended I be present given the circumstances. What circumstances? I asked. He paused. Miss Marsh, he said, carefully, I received a call this morning from a Dana Kowalski. She informed me that she would be handling the estate on behalf of the family and asked whether the process could be expedited. He had not yet spoken with her directly. She had left a voicemail. I asked if that was normal. He said that it was not unusual for family members to inquire about timing. He said it was somewhat unusual for an inquiry to arrive before the deceased had been buried. I thanked him and made an appointment for the following week. The memorial service was Sunday. Dana had arranged it with the efficiency she applied to everything that had an audience. The flowers were beautiful. The program was printed on cream-colored cardstock. There were photographs on a board, my mother at various ages, at her retirement, with her grandchildren, at Christmas. I was in exactly 2 of the photographs on that board. Dana was in 11. I counted. I am a bookkeeper, I count things. Dana stood at the front of the church and spoke for 8 minutes. She talked about her mother's warmth, her bread, her love of crosswords. She talked about Sunday phone calls. She said that even from a distance she had felt her mother's presence every day, which was true, I suppose, in the way that you feel the presence of something you have been told to appreciate without being present for it. She thanked the hospice team. She thanked the neighbors. She thanked the church community. She did not mention that I had lived in her mother's house for 12 years. She did not mention the pill organizer or the physical therapy or the 4 notebooks. She did not mention any of the specific grain of what those 12 years had contained. She thanked, and I am quoting from the program, all those who offered support near and far. Near and far. I was listed in the program as Ellen Marsh, daughter, in the same font and size as Dana Marsh Kowalski, daughter. 2 daughters, equivalent, interchangeable. The obituary and the program told a story in which we were equals in our devotion, one near and one far, both simply daughters who loved their mother. I sat in the front pew in my good black dress, and I held a program and I listened, and I let the service be what my mother deserved it to be. Dignified, attended, full of people who had genuinely loved her. I did not say anything. I was not ready yet. After the reception, Dana asked if I would help her sort through some of my mother's things. She said it in the gentle tone of someone being practical. No reason to drag this out, she said. Some of this stuff is going to need to go soon anyway. Soon anyway. I asked what she meant. Dana sat down at the kitchen table. She had a glass of wine. She had brought it from somewhere. I don't know where she found the wine. She set it on my mother's kitchen table, and she looked at me with the expression of someone delivering news they have already emotionally processed. Ellen, she said, Patrick and I have been thinking. The house is a significant asset. The market in this area has actually improved quite a bit. We spoke to someone, just informally, who thinks we could get $380, maybe $400. I looked at her. You spoke to a realtor. She adjusted the wine glass. We just asked a few questions. Obviously, nothing would happen without both of us agreeing. She paused. I mean, that's the practical thing, right? Neither of us is going to live here. You have your life, I have mine. I said, I have lived here for 12 years. Dana smiled the smile of someone who has decided that inconvenient facts are really just a matter of perspective. Ellen, you were helping Mom. That was a choice you made. A wonderful choice. But that doesn't mean, she gestured at the kitchen, at the table, at the house, that this becomes your situation to stay in indefinitely. My situation. I said I thought we should wait until after the will was read before making any decisions about the house. Dana's smile stayed in position but shifted beneath it, the way a mask shifts when the face underneath it moves. She said, of course, absolutely, we'll do everything properly. She poured more wine. She said she was going to go through Mom's jewelry in the morning, just to start the inventory. She said it the way you say something that isn't a question. I said goodnight and went to my room. The room with the window facing the backyard. The room I had slept in for 12 years. The room that still had the oak tree outside it that my father had planted before he left. I opened my notebook, volume 4, the last one, and I wrote down the date and what Dana had said, word for word, the way I always did. Then I opened my phone and found Gerald Foss's number, and I confirmed the appointment for Thursday. Then I called a woman I had met at a bookkeeping conference 3 years ago, a woman named Pam who had mentioned offhandedly that her sister was a probate attorney in Youngstown, and I asked Pam if she thought her sister might have an opening in the next few days. Pam said she would check. Her sister's name was Clara Reinhold. She called me the next morning. Clara Reinhold had the specific energy of a woman who had been underestimated for most of her professional life and had decided to find it useful rather than defeating. She was direct. She asked good questions. She did not seem surprised by anything I told her. I told her everything. The 12 years, the pill organizer, the notebooks, the obituary, the realtor Dana had already spoken to, the jewelry inventory Dana had mentioned starting the morning after the burial. Clara took notes. When I finished, she said, "Do you have documentation of your residency?" I listed what I had. Employer records, utility bills in my name, W-2s, driver's license, the notebooks. She said, "And you drove her to the attorney to update her will in 2018. I said yes. I had the date in the notebook. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ellen, I want you to understand something clearly before Thursday. In Ohio, a caregiver who has lived with and provided primary care for a decedent is not automatically entitled to additional compensation beyond what is specified in the will. However, if the will reflects your mother's actual intentions, and if your sister is already taking steps to manage the estate before probate is opened, that is a problem. Not for you, for her." She said, "Come see me Wednesday. Bring the notebooks." I brought all 4. The will was read Thursday afternoon in Gerald Foss's conference room in Youngstown. The room had the quality of rooms where serious things happen. Quiet carpet, good lighting, nothing decorative that might distract from the work. Dana arrived 5 minutes after me. She was wearing a blazer. She had a leather portfolio. She smiled at me across the conference table with the warm, practiced smile of a woman who had already calculated the outcome and was prepared to be gracious about it. Gerald Foss read the will in the measured voice of a man who understood that the document he was reading was going to matter to the people hearing it for the rest of their lives. My mother had left the house to be sold with proceeds split equally between her 2 daughters. She had left her jewelry to be divided between us. She had left a savings account, approximately $34,000, to be split equally. She had also left a letter. Gerald Foss said this before he read it. Margaret had asked him to read it aloud at the will reading if both daughters were present. Dana looked faintly surprised. I was not surprised. My mother had been a school teacher for 31 years. She understood that what you put in writing was the version that survived. The letter was 2 pages. Gerald Foss read it in full. My mother had written it in 2021, on one of her clear days, which she had specified in the letter itself. I am writing this on a morning when I know exactly who I am and what I want to say, and I want to make sure it is said while the words are still mine. She wrote about both of her daughters with honesty that was also love. She wrote that she understood Dana's life had taken her far away and that she did not hold distance against her. She wrote that she understood Ellen's life had brought her close and that she was grateful for what that closeness had meant. She wrote, Ellen did not give up 12 years of her life because I asked her to. She gave them because she is the kind of person who does not let someone fall if she can stand under them. I want this to be said in front of both of my daughters so that it cannot be unheard. And so that Dana understands that her sister's sacrifice was not invisible to me, even if it sometimes appeared invisible to everyone else. She wrote, I am leaving my estate equally because both of my daughters are my daughters and I love them equally. But equal does not mean the same. Dana's equal share comes from what she always was to me, my eldest daughter, who found her life far away and whom I loved across the distance. Ellen's equal share comes from something harder to measure, and I want the measuring to at least happen in this room. She asked that Ellen be given first choice of any personal items before formal division, as a recognition of her years in the home. She asked that the sale of the house not be initiated for a minimum of 6 months, to allow Ellen transition time, and that this be honored as a condition of the estate, not a suggestion. She wrote, I know my daughters. I know which one will try to move quickly. Please move slowly. Gerald Foss set down the letter. The conference room was very quiet. Dana's leather portfolio was closed. Her hands were flat on the table. Her expression had the quality of a structure adjusting to unexpected load. I had not known my mother had written the letter. I had known she was the kind of woman who would. There is a difference between those 2 things, and both were true. Dana asked to see me alone after the reading. We sat in Gerald Foss's waiting room while he made copies. The chairs were upholstered in a practical gray fabric. There was a plant in the corner that had clearly been there for many years. Ellen, Dana said. Her voice was careful, controlled. She was choosing words the way you choose footing on uneven ground. I want you to know that I had no idea about the letter. Mom never told me. I said I understood that. She said, I also want to say that if the obituary felt unfair, I'm sorry. I was trying to honor her. I wasn't trying to diminish you. I looked at my sister. She was 50 years old. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's capacity for not being present. She had flown out 4 times in 12 years, and she had written an obituary in which I was a subordinate clause, and she had called a realtor before our mother was buried. And she had brought a leather portfolio to the will reading because she had expected, with the confidence of someone who is usually right about what the world gives her, that this would go the way she had arranged it to go. She was sorry. I believed the sorry was real, in the way that sorry can be real while changing nothing about what the person did or why they did it. I said, "Dana, I want us to be sisters after this. I mean that. But I also need you to understand that I am going to honor Mom's wishes on the timeline. I'm not moving out in 2 weeks so a realtor can stage the house. I'll be here 6 months, and then we'll sell, and we'll split it equally, which was what she wanted and what I want." Dana looked at me. The leather portfolio was in her lap. After a long moment, she said, "Patrick is going to be difficult about the timeline." I said, "I know, that's between you and Patrick." Gerald Foss returned with the copies. I took mine. I put them in a plain manila folder, the kind I had been using for 12 years to keep track of things that mattered. Here is what happened in the months that followed, told in the flat language of someone who keeps records. Dana returned to Scottsdale. She was, as she had predicted, difficult about the timeline, or rather Patrick was, and Dana was managing Patrick's version of difficult by relaying it to me with a kind of exhausted diplomacy. But the will was the will. Gerald Foss's office was clear about the 6-month provision. Clara Reinhold was clearer. The obituary became known in Canfield for what it was. Small towns are specific ecosystems. Vivienne had noticed. Other people had noticed. By the time the notice of my mother's estate appeared in the local paper, people had begun to understand the shape of what had happened, and more than one person told me, in the way people tell you things when they want you to know they are on your side, that it hadn't gone unnoticed. I lived in my mother's house for 6 months. I made her bread on Sundays. I did her crossword on clear mornings at the kitchen table. I put her things in order with the same methodical care I had given to 12 years of pill organizers and medical appointments, and when the 6 months were done, I called a realtor, and the house sold for $392,000. My share was $196,000, equal, as my mother had wanted, the same number as Dana's share, different in every other way. I took the first choice of personal items. I took the crossword dictionary. I took a pale blue cardigan. I took the roll-top desk with the will inside it, which technically had already been unsealed, but which I kept anyway because it was her mother's desk, and it was now mine, and some things are worth keeping not for what they contain, but for what they have survived. I took the letter. Gerald Foss had given me a copy. I had it framed. It hangs in the apartment I moved into in September, on the wall above my desk, which is where I do my bookkeeping on Tuesday mornings. My mother had written, "I know which one will try to move quickly. Please move slowly." She had also written, "Ellen's equal share comes from something harder to measure, and I want the measuring to at least happen in this room." It happened. I was in the room. The measuring happened. That was enough. That was, it turned out, more than enough. Dana and I speak on the phone occasionally. The calls are cautious, like conversations between two people who have been in the same accident and are still figuring out what they owe each other. I don't know what we will become. I know what we were. I know what I did and why I did it and who saw it and who wrote it down. Patrick has strong opinions about real estate investment. My mother had strong opinions about grammar. My mother's opinions were in writing, and they were witnessed, and they were read aloud in a conference room in Youngstown, Ohio, to 2 daughters, one near and one far, and the near one had 4 notebooks and a manila folder and 12 years of Tuesdays, and the far one had a leather portfolio and a phone call she had made to a realtor before the burial. The ledger balanced. It always does eventually. A person who shows up every day does not need an obituary to prove she was there. The house itself knew. The pill organizer knew. The doctor's notebooks knew. And on the last Tuesday morning of her life, with her hand thin and her breathing slow and the room quiet and April just beginning outside the window, my mother knew. She knew I was there. That was the whole of it. The rest was paperwork. A person's care does not disappear when the one receiving it does. Somewhere, always, it is on record. If this story reminded you that the quiet ones are watching, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.